Let's watch Bernie Sanders talking to Andrew Schulz.
The issue is democracy versus billionaires being able to spend unlimited sums of money. Supreme Court went with that. And then the form it took was what's called a super PAC.
It is duplicitous. You're undermining the people, and that's where you remove, wow.
That's a very good point.
Fucking Andrew Schulz. Wow.
So Bernie Sanders has been making the rounds on Joe Rogan adjacent podcasts, including Theo Von, Lex Friedman, and now Andrew Schulz. And even though these podcast hosts try to present themselves as centrists, they effectively produce right-wing shows either by platforming right-wing extremists and not pushing back, or by engaging in both sidesism and false equivalences that always benefit Trump and the Republicans. So wittingly or unwittingly, these podcasts end up pushing their audiences towards the right, albeit to varying degrees. So the question is, how do people in the center and left of center address this? You know, there's conversations about whether or not Democrats should have their own version of Joe Rogan. And I think that that's a different conversation for a different day. But
my whole point of view with the Joe Rogan thing is, it's not that they need a Joe Rogan. It's that the left needs somebody that humanizes the candidates. The ability to sit down with a person and have a conversation and remind people that all of these politicians are just people just like you are, and, you know, kind of give them a little bit of time to talk about themselves and their goals and what they want to complete during their time or their tenure. Like, that's really what it's about. It's about that the left conducts every conversation like it's an interview. Every conversation with a left-wing person I have these pre-made questions that you guys can answer, and we're gonna do it in a really quick format. You know, the girl running for Illinois Congress that used to work for Vice, Kat. I always mess up her last name, so I'm not gonna say it. I reached out to her to try to get her to do an interview with me, and their response, her team's response, was, we can give you 10 minutes. And I was like, yeah, that's not going to happen. 10 minutes is not enough to like get to know a person, to talk to them, to help people to understand who they are. And since then, they have not responded to anything that I've said after that. And it's kind of funny because, and this is not to throw shade on Kat, because I respect the hustle. I like what she's doing. But it is kind of funny that you have this young person that's saying the left is fucking up by not doing these certain things, and then is doing the same thing that the left does. So, you know, hopefully she'll correct that, because the left does need somebody that doesn't just interview people. They need somebody that knows how to talk to people and humanize them. That's what I think the left needs as far as a Joe Rogan goes.
a lot of people seemingly have chosen to go on these shows and just provide their audiences with an alternative to the right-wing politics that they've been fed. That's what Pete Buttigieg has been doing recently, and it's what Bernie Sanders does all the time as well. I think that it makes sense to infiltrate their echo chambers and try to get their audiences to seek out politics that's more empathetic and ideally anti-capitalist. Now, I'm not expecting Pete Buttigieg to push anti-capitalism, but in this episode with Andrew Schulz, I think Bernie Sanders does a good job at planting some seeds. And the reception from Andrew Schulz's audience kind of demonstrates that the strategy is indeed successful. Although, I think that there are some limitations, which we'll talk about. But first, let's talk about the positives here, because Bernie Sanders explained how oligarchs like Elon Musk are basically able to run the country by buying off politicians. And a lot of Americans, they have a sense that money in politics is an issue, but I don't think that they're able to articulate how.
Dude, MAGA Republicans did nothing but send me fucking messages about BlackRock and George Soros and billionaires being involved and dark money, and then turned right around where like Elon Musk is fucking dope.
With much specificity, and Bernie Sanders provides this audience with a very digestible explanation with two main focal points: Citizens United and their super PACs.
The Supreme Court ruled that billionaires, that advertising is freedom of speech, and you can't limit my speech. So if I want to spend $100 million on TV ads, I have the right to do it. They say, you're right. So the issue is democracy versus billionaires being able to spend unlimited sums of money. Supreme Court went with that. And then
yeah, he's talking about Citizens United. And the answer, in my opinion, to that is that you should, this is our government. We are supposed to be the customers in this equation, and we pay for a service, which is our government, to run the country. I believe that our tax money should be used to finance, in my opinion, 4 parties. I believe there should be 4 parties with 4 representatives. I believe that there should be primaries for all 4 of those, and I believe that all those candidates should have a right to be on a debate stage. There should be some type of qualifications. Maybe you have to fucking take a test or something to be able to prove that you're mentally capable to do the fucking job of the President of the United States. But there should be some type of limitation on who can be there, as long as that limitation is just and fair. And then our tax money should pay for debate time, and it should pay for commercial time. And it should be fair. It should be across the board. This idea that Citizens United has created, that if you're a billionaire, you should be able to pay for $100 million worth of commercials, while this other person has to depend on how much ever money that they can get from billionaires to pay for their commercials. That's ridiculous. You're never going to have anything but rich people as politicians, not to mention a bunch of other hurdles. But that's, in my opinion, the beginning of that.
Form it took was what's called a super PAC. You start an organization, Americans for Freedom, okay? And billionaires can put as much money as they want into that. That organization then runs ads on television. It does political stuff. That's what it's about. So bottom line, though, most importantly, is if you are a billionaire, you can put as much money as you want into a super PAC. And in Musk's case, he spent $270 million to help Donald Trump get elected president. Do Democrats have billionaires putting money into super PACs? Absolutely. All right. What does that mean in real life? This is what it means. Right now, we're dealing with a bill called the Reconciliation Bill. It's a fancy Washington term for a very big bill, which will have a lot of stuff in it. In any case, if a Republican stands up and says, you know what, in the House of Representatives, I don't like this bill because, it's giving tax breaks to very wealthy people, and it's going to cut Medicaid and cut nutrition programs. It's a bad bill. What do you think happens the day after that Republican stands up and says he opposes it?
Those super PACs organize and...
Well, they shouldn't even. They should already know this, but they don't, because they have TDS, because they have Trump derangement syndrome. They should know this without him having to explain this to them or ask them the question, because Donald Trump literally says, if you don't pass my agenda, we will have you primaried. Elon Musk will have you primaried. And once again, these people either 100% do not listen to their own figureheads talk and give speeches or answer questions, or they play the mental gymnastics that having Trump derangement syndrome actually does do, that they do, and they make it, the Harlem versus Harvard thing. Oh, no, he didn't say that. You're just being crazy. You're the one with Trump derangement syndrome. They make it right in their own head, whatever crazy shit these people do. It's one or the other.
And they
day after that Republican stands up and says he opposes it.
Those super PACs organize and they primary out those politicians.
Exactly.
Now, the commodification of our democracy didn't start with Citizens United, but what it did do is open the floodgates. And it's to the point where Americans are no longer able to even compete with the oligarchs who are dumping millions and millions of dollars into these elections. More than 10 years ago, a Princeton study found that regular working class Americans have a statistically insignificant impact on policy outcomes compared to elites and special interests, which makes sense in this climate because regular Americans, they might be able to vote. So we live in a democracy in that sense, sure. But that's the beginning and end of their influence on politics. They don't have the money to hire lobbyists. Lobbyists that exist, they disproportionately lobby on behalf of the interests of wealthy people. Right? So if lobbyists are constantly pressuring politicians to do what they want, which often hurts working class Americans, and they supplement their lobbying with bribes in the form of campaign contributions, the result is what we have now, where rich people always get what they want and everyone else gets nothing. And things have...
Hi, tired. There you go.
only gotten worse since that study was published. We've reached the point now where politicians are committing atrocities because they're either being bankrolled by the corporations or governments benefiting from said atrocities, or they feel like they'd be targeted for opposing it, as was the case with Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman. And since they didn't back down, they were challenged and they lost their seats in Congress. The clearest example of this is AIPAC, which funds politicians in both parties to support Israel's genocide of Palestinians in Gaza. Bernie Sanders is going to explain in this next clip how organizations like AIPAC perpetuate this system, and he also talks about how they sanitize their image. And it seemingly has led to a type of light bulb moment for Andrew Schulz in particular. So let's watch and then we'll discuss.
I introduced legislation to say we're going to block the sale of certain military weaponry to Israel. I got 15 Democrats to support me. I got 0 Republicans. Why do you think more Democrats didn't support me? Because if Democrats support me, they will have to take on AIPAC. You mentioned Jamal Bowman.
Yeah.
Well, that's what you're talking about.
What'd they spend, like 15 or 20 million to get him out of there? Exactly. This is up in Westchester, too.
You got it.
Okay.
Cori Bush in Missouri, St. Louis, was defeated. A woman in the state of Washington, Pramila Jayapal's sister ran. So if you want to speak out against Netanyahu's government and oppose military sales, AIPAC, which is also funded by billionaires who support both Democrats and Republicans, so we'll go after.
How can they do this effectively? Like, how can they sway a vote if the people don't support the idea?
You know how you do it?
How?
This is rather amazing. Great question. You don't talk about the issue. To the best of my knowledge, and I'm 99% sure I'm right, they didn't say one word about Israel.
Wow.
The argument was he's a bad Democrat or whatever the usual negative advertising. Didn't talk about Israel.
So this is quite interesting because if a group, like if a super PAC was honest about what they were raising against, for example, they spent that 20 million specifically defending their position on Israel, I wonder if we would be more amenable to that, because that is the issue at hand, instead of using funding to make this person radioactive, which they might not exactly be. And undermining, it is duplicitous. You're undermining the people, and that's where you remove, wow.
That's a very good point.
Bernie is absolutely correct. AIPAC spent a record-breaking $15 million to unseat Jamal Bowman, and their stooge, George Latimer, barely mentioned Israel at all on the campaign trail. He framed Jamal Bowman as the mirror image of Donald Trump and implied...
Yep, there he is. That's perfect. That is fucking spot on.
That extremism on both sides was really the reason why DC was so dysfunctional. And this example seemingly made it click for Andrew Schulz. You can almost see the light bulb go off over his head. But this right here is where you have to connect the dots for him, specifically his audience. See, if elites and interest groups hide their real agenda with an issue as serious as genocide, then you've got to think about the other ways that they're misleading the public. Perhaps when super PACs that run ads on behalf of Republicans tell you that immigrants and trans people are the cause of all of our country's problems, maybe you should question their motives there as well.
Exactly. It's fucking fear. It's fucking control. And it doesn't fucking just end up in one party or the other. I've said this before. Democrats and Republicans definitely disagree on values and value systems. I definitely lean much harder left than I ever will towards the right. And for good fucking reason. But the real war that is actually happening every fucking day in this country is those people that have hoarded all the resources, the ultra wealthy people, versus everyone else. That's the real fucking war. Because they are just looking to have as much control as they possibly can over you, so that way you can't speak out, so you can't speak up. So that way you're not an irritant to them. So you're not abrasive to them. You don't piss them off. Instead, you shut up and you build the robots like you're supposed to. And I think a lot of times the problem between the left and the right is that the left says something along the lines of, you can verify for your own happiness, your own education, your own knowledge, that the things that these people are telling you are incorrect, but you choose not to because instead you want to live with this base feeling of winning, because a good proportion of those people have never had a W. And they want to have one. And that's what I was saying. The young people voting for Donald Trump, they want to feel like they're winning. They want to feel like this guy he's owning the libs. They want to feel like all of these things that they feel deep down inside are true. And Donald Trump makes them feel like that by saying, I'll go out there and I'll do mean shit to these people and it'll make you feel better. And they're like, okay, all right, cool. And I think that on the left, you tell them that something is wrong with this or that. And if you're on the left, you need, 47 hours of research before you can come to a decision on it. And I think the reality of this situation is that it is going to take the people that aren't ultra wealthy, the people that are not currently hurting resources, finding common cause, common ground to get us out of this shit. And if you don't, then eventually I 100% believe we are going to be living in a techno-feudalistic society.
And ask yourself if they're also trying to hide their real agenda. See, sometimes you have to hold their hands and guide them to the most obvious conclusion, because they're not going to automatically connect the dots themselves. But to be clear, the goal is not to win over Andrew Schulz. The goal is to plant seeds with the audience to win them over. Because Andrew Schulz is not someone who is an honest actor, in my opinion. And I say that because he talks about how Democrats are out of touch with working class people, which is true, but he never has the same energy for Donald Trump and the Republican Party, who are gearing up to cut Medicaid, which means that millions of Americans would...
So what I think Mike's getting wrong here, and this is something that oftentimes happens on the left, is he's giving Andrew Schulz too much credit. Andrew Schulz is an idiot. He's not understanding something that is very key to why Trump supporters are who they are. He thinks that they legitimately recognize this flaw in their argument. They do not. They do not. Whether or not they are lying to themselves and have lied to themselves enough to make themselves feel confident about it, or whether or not they are completely unaware of it, they do not see this flaw in their argument. They believe they are correct. He is giving him too much credit when he says he doesn't think he's an honest actor. On the other side, my argument is, I do believe that he's an honest actor. I also believe he's honestly a fucking idiot.
Lose their health insurance, low-income Americans in particular. And I don't think that he's doing this on purpose per se. Frankly, I think that he's a simpleton who bases his politics on vibes.
Okay, Mike.
And the only issue that really seems to galvanize him is pussy. For example, in 2021, he thought that Trump was a pussy for throwing a tantrum about the 2020 election. But by 2024, he supported Trump because Trump gets pussy, I guess.
When I was younger, like, Democrats were cool. They were getting their dick sucked in the...
But that is, if, like I said, watch that Jordan Klepper video. That is what these people voted for. Once again, you're giving way too much credit to this guy that he should, he's going to vote based off of actual policies or things that are happening. He's only voting on what makes him feel good. That's it.
The office, they were like, right? They were like, they were like supportive of like hip hop music. They said, do whatever you want.
Later, tired. Good luck, my friend.
Like, we don't want to be in your bedroom. They were cool with gay people. Like, it was cool to be a Democrat. Now, conservatives got 3 baby mamas. The president got 3 baby mamas. He's getting pussy left and right. Right? He's cool. He's the one saying, say whatever the fuck you want. So now conservatives have become Democrats. So I don't think I've changed. I just like the dudes that get pussy and say whatever they want. So it's very, you want me to be a Democrat again? Get some pussy. Tell me to say whatever I want.
Yeah. So needless to say, I don't have a very high opinion of him. And I think that he's not qualified at all to say that anyone else is out of touch. This man doesn't know what issues affect working class people if he bases his own votes on who's getting pussy and which politicians are telling him that he can say what he wants. If you literally vote based on who you think is more cool as a 40-something-year-old man as opposed to policy, I don't think that you should be the one to accuse anyone else of being out of touch. You should look in the mirror. Furthermore, if it's the vibes that matter the most to you, if you want politicians to tell you that you can say whatever you want, then this moment from this same podcast should have forced Andrew Schulz to reconsider his support for Donald Trump.
There are people, as I'm sure you're familiar with, a young woman from Turkey, for God's sakes, was in Massachusetts, went to Tufts University. You remember that? Mm-hmm. This woman walks down the street, suddenly guys grab her with masks on, throw her into a van, take her to a detention center. Why? Because she wrote an op-ed critical of the war in Gaza.
Now, that came up at a later point in the podcast, but if Andrew Schulz were an honest actor who didn't know about that, but he genuinely did care about free speech, that issue alone should be the wake-up call that he needs to repudiate Donald Trump entirely. Will he do that? Probably not. Because another element that we don't often talk about is when you have a podcast and you start to bring on guests and you cultivate a particular audience that wants to hear certain things from you, you begin to worry that the gravy train is going to dry up if you start to question what your audience was primed to believe. So there's often this incentive that emerges once you cultivate a right-wing audience to not challenge their beliefs. And insofar as you do that, you let somebody else come on and talk about things that your audience might not want to hear because, you know, at least you could say, I'm just letting them talk. I'm not saying it, they're saying it. But I don't think that Andrew Schulz has enough brain cells to actually make the connection between free speech and Rumeysa Ozturk, to be clear. Because, you know, when people like him talk about free speech, they usually only mean that they want to be allowed to say slurs on social media without getting banned. So even though...
Like I said, the two main things that people like Andrew Schulz voted for was owning the libs, making them cry, and being able to say the word retard. That's it. That's the only thing that they care about. There's nothing deeper to this. And that's, like I said, I think that's the mistake of the left of overthinking. The mistake of the left of thinking like, there's this, there's that, oh, it could have been this, it could have been that. No, it's simple. And I know that it paints a really bad picture. It paints a potentially very disappointing and an unhopeful picture of the future of America. But this is who they are. They wanted the people that were mean to them to cry, and they want to be able to call those people retards. That's it. This isn't a lot of these people. I'm not saying all of them, but a lot of these people aren't that complicated.
You know, he was personable and agreeable with Bernie Sanders. I don't think that Andrew Schulz is gettable. But again, that isn't the goal here, right? The goal here is for Bernie Sanders to win over people in his audience who are gettable, and they're gettable because most of them presumably...
I do think the one thing I will disagree with him on that is I do think it's actually important that he does win over Andrew Schulz, because I think when, say, Joe Rogan, right? Somebody like Joe Rogan, when you get him to agree, when you get him to say things that are conflicting with the beliefs of his audience and the person that you've now convinced them to like, I do believe that that has an impact on these people because, once again, I think they're a lot less complicated than people on the left want to believe. I think that their reasonings for why they believe the things that they believe are a lot less complicated than people on the left want to believe. I think that sometimes these people only believe the things they believe because Andrew Schulz does. I think that these people sometimes only believe the things that they believe because Joe Rogan does. And I think that's why, you know, I said this, Redonk gave me shit on election night saying that Joe Rogan, Trump going on Joe Rogan's podcast helped win an election. And I was like, steadfast. No, you're wrong. You're wrong. You're wrong. No, I was wrong. I was wrong because I was that person saying to myself, there's absolutely no way a logical, critically thinking human being would just decide to vote for a candidate because they went on your favorite podcaster's program. And he was right, and I was wrong.
They don't have coherent views on politics like the hosts. They probably have opinions on certain issues and follow politics here and there, but there's no underlying philosophy tying it all together, which is why they go back and forth between Democrats and Republicans. This is what a lot of Americans do, not just this audience. And what's interesting about this podcast is that All of the hosts told Bernie Sanders that they supported him in 2016, but they felt really disillusioned with the Democratic Party after they sabotaged.
Yep, just literally talked about that on the Political Drain. I said one of the craziest parts about it is how the Bernie Sanders crowd, out of spite, voted for Trump because they hated what happened to Bernie. And that's the worst kind of villain you can become. A person that loves something because morally you thought it was the correct thing to love, and then because that person was betrayed, that you then betray your own values, and at the same time you are betraying that individual. So like it's insane, but it is true. I've had people that come in here that say no Bernie Sanders person voted for Trump. You're wrong. Everybody's wrong sometimes.
Him. And that feeling of disillusionment might have led them, as well as their viewers, down the path that they're on today. And I want to show you how Bernie Sanders addressed this.
We have a question we want to ask about what happened to you in 2016 with this Bernie Bros movement, where your followers are seeing they have a racism problem, a misogyny problem. Do you think that's a super PAC thing behind that?
That was the Democratic establishment. That was the...
Wow. Okay.
And see, this is why I like Bernie. People are like, he didn't stand up for himself. Bernie is a fucking man, okay? Bernie stood up and said, what they did to me was wrong, but Donald Trump is worse for this country than what they did to me. And that takes a real fucking strong person to be able to do that. Do you know how easy it would have been for Bernie to just walk right through that right-wing grifting door if he was that kind of human being? He didn't do it because he doesn't stand for that shit. And that's why I like Bernie, is because he can sit there on that couch. He could have blamed it on the PACs. He could have, there's people on the left right now that are upset with him for saying this. He could have just blamed it on the PACs. These guys would have accepted it. They would have been happy with that. But he didn't. He said it was the Democratic establishment.
That was just, they were sitting there. We had a lot of young people. We had people of color. And
yeah, Troy actually pointed out something, too, that I have not pointed out. And that is the Bernie Bros were angry. So were the RFK voters. The RFK voters that went to Trump as well for the same reasons. Because they felt like RFK was getting shorter than a stick. Him and his worm. Okay? And so they went over. I've said it before that there's things that the left does that instead of addressing the things, they tend to just push it off and act like it didn't happen. But that is disavowing the fact that like you did it, right? So it's like, if you didn't want RFK Jr. in the party or working with you, say Kamala Harris, then you need to explain why. You need to not just act like it didn't happen. I thought that working with somebody like Bernie Sanders after RFK Jr. started working with Donald Trump would have been a nice counterbalance for them. Yeah, we don't want to work with RFK Jr. because Bernie Sanders actually aligns a lot more with the things that we believe. That, in my opinion, that would have made a huge difference. Bernie, thank you for being over on Twitch, first of all, Han. Bernie stood up when the country needed him to gut the Patriot Act. He stood up and walked into the shitter and hid. His non-vote caused the Patriot Act spying to continue. That is every politician that has ever lived up to this point, except for maybe Rand Paul. Rand Paul might have voted against it.
They create this kind of myth with the help of the corporate media and all that stuff.
It's kind of interesting to that.
But the thing about that, Han, the one thing I will say about that is that there is a fine line, and this is why I'm not a hardcore left-wing person. This is why a lot of people on the left would not agree with me, and this is why a lot of people on the right will not agree with me on this, is that there is a limited amount of authority that the government should have to monitor communications when there are legitimate threats to safety. That's why I like Bernie, is because Bernie isn't a person that just says, I'm just this person, so therefore I always vote this way. And I think that drives people fucking nuts, and that's why I drive people nuts. Oh, you're a centrist. 99% of the things that I believe are very much left wing. But yes, on a couple things. I've said this before. One of the things that'll drive the left absolutely fucking dog shit, bat shit, dog shit crazy, whichever shit crazy, is my take on the Israel war. And that is that I think that Israel had the right to defend themselves after October 7th. I think that Joe Biden had a job as the leader of America to support their ally. And I think that when Israel took that shit too far and has done what they have done since that time, that Joe Biden should not have continued to support that, nor should have America should have. And people, oh, that's centrist, that's both sides. No, it isn't. It's fucking logical. It's the way that the world works. We have this idea in our heads that you can just draw this moral line and that the rest of the world will just fucking deal with you drawing that moral line, but that's not quite how anything works. We do have obligations to our allies because it is very important that our allies understand that during their times of need will be for them, because when we need them, we want them to be there. Nothing is as simple as just saying he should have voted down the Patriot Act. There are so many things that go into that. And like I said, who was it? Fucking, God damn it. Platonic just commented on one of my videos because I said Douglas Murray in this video. Douglas Murray is a garbage ass human being. Literally started the video by saying Douglas Murray is a garbage ass human being. And then I went on to say that Douglas Murray was calling out Joe Rogan and doing a good job of it. And he was pissed at me because I was saying Douglas Murray did something good. He did. He called out Joe Rogan. Does that make Douglas Murray a good person? No, it fucking doesn't make Douglas Murray a good person. But what he did, does it make sense that what he did was the appropriate thing that all people should be doing? Yeah, it just so happens that time fucking Douglas Murray got it right. And this is why the conversations with me with people, I can't deal with people. Because there is a time where emotion should be the focal point. And then there are times where logic needs to take control. And the best thing that you can have in any life is a balance of both of those things. The ability to be passionate and react with passion when it's necessary, but also the ability to take a step back and apply critical thinking and logic to something that you don't completely fucking understand. I know that will piss off a lot of people, but that is how I feel.
Note is during this election, the podcast space, which the Democrats largely avoided, they feel had some.
Yeah, thank you, DJ. Me and DJ, we've been buddies for a long time for a reason. My right-wing friends think I'm a lefty, and my left-wing friends think I'm a righty. Does it mean I'm a centrist? I don't think it does. I think that everybody, anytime you disagree with either side, they want to push you onto the other side so that way they feel morally correct and saying that what you believe is the wrong thing to believe. I genuinely believe that. And like I said, I would say 98%, 99% of the time, I'm going to fall into the left-wing category. But I've told you guys before, I've had left-wing people come on here and tell me I'm a piece of shit, piece of human garbage. Like, I don't fucking know. Like, that's what you are. And then I've had a couple people call me centrist. Only a couple people call me a centrist.
Influence in the election. And they started to label us the podcast bros and said that we were...
Wait.
The
media and all that stuff of color and
wow. Super PAC thing behind that?
That was the Democratic establishment. That was the
wow. Okay.
That was just they were sitting there. We had a lot of young people. We had people of color, and they create this kind of myth with the help of the corporate media and all that stuff.
It's kind of interesting to that note is during this election, the podcast space, which the Democrats largely avoided, they feel had some influence in the election, and they started to label us the podcast bros and said that we were sexist and we were racist and bigoted. It's almost like it's the exact same strategy to get you out of there.
Yeah, that's what the liberal elite China does.
Yeah, hold on.
Is during this election,
a lot of young people. We have people of color, and
Hold on.
they create this kind of myth with the help of the corporate
I'm going to
media
give
and all
him
that stuff.
one more
what's
try
kind of
at
interesting to that note is during this election, the podcast space, which the Democrats largely avoided, they feel had some influence in the election, and they started to label us the podcast bros and said that we were sexist and we were racist and bigoted. It's almost like it's the exact same strategy to get you out of there.
Yeah, not quite. Not quite. Now, I will say that I do not think it was a good idea for left-wing, for Kamala Harris to avoid these types of conversations. I do believe, if you look at what Pete Buttigieg did, and if you look at what Bernie Sanders is doing, that doing it in the correct way would have been a benefit to Kamala Harris's campaign. I think that Tim Walz would have probably been the perfect person for it. Send Tim Walz on these shows. He probably would have been perfect for it. He's a good dude. He's a nice guy. He probably would have these guys probably would have been like, you're actually pretty cool. He could have done it. He's a real human being. But I'm not going to sit here and act like you guys are misogynists. You guys are sexist. You guys are assholes. In fact, that's your form of comedy, and you say that you can't do it because of the left. So like this denial that, they canceled me, bro. No, like you admit to the fact that the shit that you do is so asshole-ish that there is a subsect of our society that's like, yeah, you shouldn't get to do that because it's too asshole-ish.
Yeah, that's what the liberal elite China does. They run away. Look, again, I would hope that everybody who's watching the program is that we as a nation have got to end all forms of bigotry.
Yeah,
right? Yes, that I start off as a basic assumption.
Unless it's to your close friends, right?
Yeah, whether it's racism or sexism, homophobia, or xenophobia, whatever it is. But, liberal Democrats talk about that all the time. And then you get to what we call identity politics.
Yeah.
That you're black, you're wonderful, you're tremendous, you're gay, you're the greatest human being on earth.
Yeah.
And rather than say, what do you stand for?
Exactly.
Well, gay, that's fine, who cares?
Yeah.
But what do you stand for?
Yeah.
Is every gay person brilliant and wonderful and great? No, of course not. Everybody's a human being.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So the issue is what you stand for, which gets you back to what we discussed earlier, class politics, in the sense of which side are you on? Are you going to stand with working families? Are you going to raise the minimum wage to a living wage or not? Are you going to fight to guarantee health care to all people or not? Are you going to demand that the wealthiest people start paying their fair share of taxes or not? Those are the issues. And no one cares what color you are, what your gender is, et cetera, et cetera.
First and foremost, working class, quote.
Yeah, I'm going to let Mike speak on this, but I'm just going to say this. There are assholes in all groups of people. There are black assholes, there are white assholes, there are gay assholes, there are straight assholes. And nobody gets a fucking pass, man. Like, that is a problem in our society. And you have seen it in certain places where people go, well, hey, you can't talk to this person because they are this. And it's like, well, that's not true. And that does cause conflict. And Bernie's right. Like, at the end of the day, that's why it is so hurtful to the left when a person that is gay speaks in defense of Donald Trump. Because they're like, hold on, we've been defending you. We've been standing up. We've been saying nobody gets to talk shit to you because you happen to be a protected class. And now you're talking shit about our people and you're praising the guy who's talked shit about you. And that's a trap. You got to treat people, when we talk about people being treated equally, that means treating people equally. That means we understand that there are assholes in every group of human beings. That being an asshole, being a misogynist, being a racist, being homophobic is not specific, though sometimes it seems like it's more prevalent. in certain types of people. It is something that we need to get past as a society, is that regardless of what class you are, what classification you are, there are assholes across the spectrum.
Bernie Bros and multimillionaire podcast hosts are not similar in any way, shape, or form. And the reason why they accused you of being right-wing, Andrew, is because you platformed fascist politicians like Donald Trump and helped to launder his reputation. So suffice to say, I don't think that you were unfairly smeared. I think that the characterization given to you by them is fair, given your own words and actions. Exactly. As for Bernie Sanders, even though he's correct on the substance, he's right to say that Democratic Party elites do cynically weaponize identity politics. I don't think that he did a good job here in this portion of the podcast, given the type of audience that he was speaking to. Yes, Democrats weaponize identity politics, but there's a meaningful difference between the weaponization of identity politics and advocating for social and racial justice, which is important. To right-wingers,
But what what he should say here is, I mean, I guess he did say it. So, is that the left doesn't do a good job of explaining the difference between those two things. Sometimes the left has a really fucking hard time of pulling back that passion, which is appropriate. It's great to be passionate. Like I said, pulling back that passion and you know, hedging it with this ability to speak and say social justice is incredibly important because of this, this, and this. People should be protected or in these protected classes because of these things. And they don't do that well sometimes. Instead, it's, you should just know this and you don't because you're an idiot and you're a racist. And I think that Daryl Davis, that black man that converts Ku Klux Klan members, is probably one of the prime examples of this. And that he says when he sits down with these Klan members, they say like the most horrific, fucked up shit to him. Black people aren't as smart as white people. Black people are criminals. And he said he just lets them talk. And he lets them talk. And he lets them talk. And then when they're done talking, he says to them, you want to know something? I've never committed a crime. I don't even have a traffic ticket. And they go, well, that's just, you're the anomaly. He goes, you want to know something? I have a college degree and I teach music. Oh, well, and he goes, one of the things is that I don't press them on anything. I let them speak all the hate and the dumb shit they believe. And then at the end of the day, they have to go home with the couple things that I said to them. And then they roll those things around in their mind. And then about a week later, I get an email that says, you know, I really enjoyed our conversation. And you've made me rethink some things. And he's actually gotten Klans members to send him their robes, a black man. And I'm not saying that that's an effective strategy for all of these people. I'm saying that it's much more complicated than that. And that on occasion, the left needs to be better when presented with the opportunity to do so, where they do explain things better, but in less words. Obviously, I'm not that person.
I don't think they know the difference. It seems like to them they're one and the same because they often accuse marginalized people of weaponizing identity politics if they simply talk about social justice issues. So this conversation is often used, also cynically, ironically, as an excuse to dismiss the importance of social.
Yeah, well, what Silent said is also true. When you say something like the right wants to insist that racism and sexism no longer exist, that's also, like, that's the other side of that coin. That is, it doesn't exist. Well, that's fucking stupid. Obviously, it does exist. Like I said, I come from that background. I can tell you all about it.
Social and racial justice issues when these issues cannot be dismissed because they are important and they require politicians to address them. But in that clip, Bernie Sanders, he almost sounded like a class reductionist. And even though I know that he's not that, I worry that the people listening might feel like they're forced to make a false choice between class issues and social issues based on that conversation. And if a politician, signals support for racial justice causes, they might think, oh, okay, well, they're against class issues and they're against me.
And that gets to a point that I keep making, and that's reductionism. And that is, you don't have to believe just one thing. You can focus on multiple things all at the same time. We can focus on fixing the border, but also not do things like deport people that are living here and not causing a problem or doing anything to harm the people that live here. We can agree that something like the insolvency of Social Security is a problem, and talk about the fact, what was it Merton just said? In fact, Merton just said that maybe it isn't about increasing wages, but instead reducing the cost of living. And so it's like, now I might be a raise the minimum wage guy, and Merton might be a lower living cost person, but that doesn't mean that either one of those ideas has to be the end-all solution of the conversation. It could be a conversation in which we talk about both things being potentially part of it, one thing being better than the other being potentially part of it, me being wrong or Merton being wrong. That's my problem, is this reductionist attitude that so many people in this country have. And that is, well, the most important thing is this one thing. Therefore, we can't talk about the other things. We can talk about all of these things. We just need to take a fucking deep breath.
And you have to make it abundantly clear that it is not a zero-sum game. You have to fight for both, and you have to reject that false dichotomy. And I don't think Bernie Sanders was clear enough here. Furthermore, Bernie Sanders should have pointed out how obsessed Republicans are with so-called identity politics. White identity politics is still identity politics. And since this was brought up in the context of super PACs, I wish Bernie Sanders would have explained how both parties cynically weaponize identity politics specifically for oligarchs. I mean, for Democrats, since they're beholden to special interests and large multinational corporations, getting more women and people of color elected to them is their way of showing the base that they're making progress. It kind of does two things. It says, hey, we're still moving forward as a society. It placates the base while not upsetting their corporate donors who want them to not push as far for certain policies, Medicare for all, for example. But Republicans, they also focus on identity politics. They focus on white identity politics because demonizing minorities obscures the nature of our capitalist political system. And if you think trans people and immigrants are the cause of all of our country's problems, you'll be less likely to not look at the people at the top as
it's a distraction.
The real culprits. So if you plant those anti-capitalist seeds and understand how everything goes back to capitalism and defending and protecting capital, then it might have been better. But I don't think Bernie Sanders did that, nor did he explain identity politics well in this particular section of the podcast. Not to mention, both parties also invoke anti-Semitism all the time to shut down criticism of Israel as well. So you can't just say, oh, well, this is just a...
Yeah, we have tons of examples of that in recent history.
Democratic Party problem. It's a problem that both parties...
By the way, I just gave my take on that.
do, right? For nefarious, cynical reasons. So I think that this was a missed opportunity from Bernie Sanders here, at least with respect to this issue. Because these podcasts, what they do, if you listen to them, they always try to bring the conversation back to how Democrats and Democrats alone are bad, which means that you've got to challenge that when you come onto these podcasts and burst their bubble and let them know it's not just the Democratic Party that's bad. Sure, they're bad, but Republicans are bad, and not only that, they're worse. And to be fair,
that's what I was going to say. The main goal in this conversation, specifically this Republican Party, the main goal is, somebody just said, was it Super Saint? Somebody else said that Kamala Harris wanted to build affordable housing. That is true. When there is no comparison between who is the light and who is the darkness when it comes to Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump. Kamala Harris wanted to stop grocery stores from price gouging you by eliminating their ability to take advantage of you during crises, okay, with a price gouging ban, which already exists in 34 states in America and could have been instituted on the federal level. Kamala Harris wanted to influence the middle class in a way that could allow them to do things like purchase affordable housing by building more housing. Kamala Harris has already, as an attorney general, reduced recidivism rates in prisoners by rehabbing rather than putting them in jail. Who goes to jail? It's not the ultra wealthy. It's the middle class and the poor. On the other side is making the liberals cry, crashing the economy, so that way techno oligarchs can take control of the fucking country. Like, there's no comparison between these two. And that's something that I want people, like I said, people will get mad at me because they'll say, you're playing both sides. No, I'm not playing both sides. I clearly believe at this point in my life that the left-wing Democratic Party has more of the people's interests in it than the right wing does. By far. I'm just always up for the conversation.
Fair, Bernie Sanders did that all throughout the episode, but when it comes to this issue, you can't give Republicans a pass. You have to explicitly name...
Dude, silent. You know I love you. Silent. Lena Khan. Fucking Lena Khan being removed is one of the fucking worst outcomes for the middle class that just like completely goes unthought of by people in our society. The left, I mean, for like 5 seconds, alt media creators talked about it. But the fact that Lena Khan wasn't talked about more is why I'm disheartened with how things get handled in this country on both sides. Because every fucking person in this country should be educated on how Lena Khan made their lives better. Because these are the things that are important. These are the small things. When you have somebody that is keeping, credit card companies from fucking scamming people with the CFPB, when you have Lena Khan getting rid of the ability for you, for companies to keep you from being able to cancel services easily. Somebody that fights through antitrust lawsuits to stop companies like Meta and Google from having monopolies. Like, you don't see it in your everyday life. But behind the scenes, that shit's really fucking important, man.
And shame them. Otherwise, it's going to come across as you conceding that Democrats are exclusively and uniquely bad here when that is not the case. And focusing more on, Republicans in particular is actually, I think, a good strategy, even if, you might not like Democrats, because the people who listen to this podcast probably don't hear critiques of Republicans very often. And to the extent that they do, it's probably a pro-Trump critique and, talking about how rhinos are bad or whatever bullshit they come up with. Yep. But I do want to move on because there's one more clip here that I want to show you where they talk about the Democratic Party again. And I think that this gives us some insight into why these types of guys in particular moved away from the Democratic Party. And then I have a lot to say about that as well. So let's watch.
We felt that over the last 4 elections, Democrats, we felt that we didn't have a say on who could be president. We talk a lot about the Republicans being autocrats and oligarchs and taking over democracy, but from the Democrat perspective, and I'm a lifelong Democrat, I felt like the Democratic Party completely removed the democratic process from its constituents. And I think they need to have some accountability.
And what happened, like, I like Kamala. Kamala would have been my choice. Kamala was my choice during the debate, the original debates. I called her Mamala the whole time. I was like, I think America needs some big mom energy. And I think that she could hit somebody with a chancla, okay? And make them fucking behave. But that was worsened because the right knows that the left already felt that way. I hate to agree with Andrew Schulz. But that was also worsened even more by what happened with Bernie. And that is sometimes, once again, a problem in the party is the kind of the parenting of the constituent of we know better what's better for you than you do, right? But I think Obama, to be honest, Obama kind of pushed his way in there. So hold on. Okay, I found my way to disagree with Andrew Schulz. Thank God. Thank God. Obama was a selection from the people. I mean, I would be hard-pressed to say the second time that he wasn't, because people loved him from the first time. Yeah, no, actually, I disagree. Did he say, how long did he say, though? Maybe he's just talking since Biden or Hillary. Maybe he's talking just since Hillary. If he's talking just since Hillary, I could probably agree. But if he's talking about going all the way back to Obama, he said the last 4 presidents, right? He's fucking wrong about Obama. 100% wrong about Obama. Obama was the choice of the people.
Ability of that.
No argument here.
I donated for you. I mean, I wanted you to, like, 2016. I was like, this is going to happen. This guy's going to do it, and it felt like they stole it from me. And I'll be honest, it broke my heart when you supported him.
Look, but you have, in the world that I live in, you got a choice, and I mean, a lot of people, including my wife, agree with you. But you know, you're down to a choice. Is it going to be Hillary Clinton or is it going to be Donald Trump? Not a great choice,
but it ended up being.
And see, that's what I said. I didn't pre-watch this. That's what I said. Bernie Sanders chose, when he couldn't be the candidate, to say, I don't like this, I don't enjoy this, but I don't want Donald Trump to be the president.
Being him anyway, so why don't we burn it down?
Well, because it's easy to say burning it down means that children are not going to have, you know, food to eat, that the schools will deteriorate, people will not have health care.
Ostensibly, there hasn't been a fair primary for the Democrats since 2008. Are they not also a threat to democracy? We often hear...
Fair enough. That is, yeah, I'm not going to argue with that point.
So I think it's hard to say that these guys are representative of average men, since they're very wealthy, so they're not going to have the same lived experience as regular people who listen to them. But this feeling of disillusionment was probably a turning point for a lot of people. Not just them. I mean, as a Bernie bro myself, I felt extremely disillusioned with the Democratic Party, and I still do. I still don't trust them, and everything that they said in that clip was absolutely factually true. In 2016, the DNC...
Damn, me and Mike both agreed with him. Well, at least I'm not alone.
Teacher had to resign in disgrace after she was caught sabotaging Bernie Sanders when she was supposed to be neutral. And in 2020, when Bernie Sanders was running away with the primary, party elites were prepared to steal the nomination away from him if he wasn't able to win an outright majority. So if the centrist Democrats didn't coalesce around Biden and Bernie ended up winning, we might have seen a very ugly situation unfold where the Democratic Party establishment might have actually taken the nomination away from somebody who won with a plurality. With that being said, feeling disillusioned with the Democratic Party, even if you're justified, is not a justification to jump to the opposite end of the political spectrum and support a fascist.
100%.
And that's why it is so important to point their audience in the correct direction and help them form a more coherent political ideology. Because without any underlying goals or philosophy or principles, you could be a social democrat one election, and then the next you could support a fascist. Now, to be clear, I don't think that it's as simple as them supporting Trump because they hate Democrats. I think that a lot of people are lost and they feel aimless politically, but some of them happen to stumble upon these podcasts and they see Joe Rogan and Andrew Schulz and they think that they're relatable and they form these parasocial relationships with them. And once that trust is already established, it's easy to follow them down the right-wing paths that they take. And I think that this phenomenon is obviously happening, and Democrats have to understand what's happening and why it's happening in part. And they have to rebuild the trust that they lost with these kinds of people if they want to win them back. See, Bernie Sanders was bringing people into the Democratic Party, but it wasn't the kind of people that the Democratic Party wanted. They wanted center-right suburbanites and anti-Trump Republicans because those voters had much lower expectations in terms of policy.
And he's right about that, because that's the same thing that happened during Truman during the Red Scare, after Roosevelt passed and Truman had to run after he had served the final years of Roosevelt's final term, and Truman ran. He was running against the Secretary of Agriculture. I always forget his name, but the Secretary of Agriculture was this like really well-respected guy, super smart, very, very progressive person. And he was bringing with him a ton of the communist vote. The left felt that the communist vote was toxic, that it was tainted, that people in America hated communism, that it was the wrong thing. And it's very comparable to Bernie's situation, where bringing progressives into a Democratic Party that believed in playing between the 45s and reaching across to corporate interests on the right was the way to win. He very much was the exact opposite of what they really wanted people to come in. And that's really sad, because unfortunately, the type of people that he was bringing in were people that were saying the middle class deserves to be treated better, that poor people deserve to be treated better, that social safety net should exist, that, everybody goes too far sometimes. We all do. I used to take things way too far, especially when it came to racism. Like, somebody who was racist, like, I physically got violent with people. Some people would say that's not taking it too far. But if you were in my shoes and you're around some of the times that I did the things I did, I could tell you 100% sometimes I went too far. And so there is a time where everybody goes too far, but that doesn't mean that like people, for instance, that were very anti-violence, but also anti-racist, would hate me, even though we had like the same basis of foundation, right, of our beliefs, because I was willing to take it to a physical place where they thought that that was a mistake, and in doing so, like, I embarrassed those people, or I made them feel as uncomfortable. And a lot of those people, instead of choosing to kind of disown me or disavow me, instead kind of explained themselves to me and made me feel like, all right, like, I don't agree with you. I believe that there is a time where this is important, but you're probably right. There are times where maybe that shouldn't be the first thing that I jump to. And that's what is supposed to make the left, is we're supposed to be able to have conversations about the people in the party that we agree with foundationally on their morals, on the directions that they want to take the country, but also be able to criticize and analyze the things that they do that we disagree with, or the paths that they take to accomplish them. The problem sometimes on the left, obviously, is that there are certain times where we get so mad that somebody has some small difference with us that we tend to push those people away rather than talking to them and deciding on something that would benefit all of us. And I think that that's something that we have to be better about. As I've said before, Mike here is a much more progressive person than me. Mike will 100% stand up there and say that Israel is garbage and should never have done anything that they ever did. And I will sit here and say, hey, I saw some of that shit that happened on October 7th. And I'll tell you this, if that was one of my kids, I probably would have went over there myself and probably would have fucking ended up getting myself murdered trying to take revenge. I don't think that that means that me and Mike can't have a conversation. I think that that's actually just the right time to have a conversation.
See, a Liz Cheney supporting anti-Trump Republican isn't going to ask for Medicare for all. They're going to be fine with tweaks around the edges. But a Bernie bro, a quote-unquote Bernie bro, however, is going to want something much more substantial like Medicare for all, which would put the party at odds with their health industry donors who do not want them to support that policy for obvious reasons. And the fact that so many Democrats simply won't acknowledge this reality, or they'll speak around the issue of money in politics, that is why there's a trust issue, and Democrats have to address this. The fact that the party is at odds with their own base because of their donors has to be addressed directly.
100%.
But even though there's nothing wrong with what was said in that clip, it kind of goes back to my point about both sidesism and false equivalences that bothers me about these podcasts. Right now, Democrats are not in power. Republicans are. And Trump is violating the First, Fourth, Fifth, Sixth, Eighth, and 14th Amendments. His authoritarianism should be the primary focus for center-left guests going on these right-leaning podcasts like this, because not addressing the elephant elephant in the room might make viewers think that Trump's authoritarianism isn't so bad, because if the Democrats are also authoritarian and undemocratic, then why does it matter if Trump's also authoritarian and undemocratic? Why does it matter if Trump wants to do away with due process and habeas corpus if Democrats would probably do the same thing? You have to be clear here and make sure you are not creating a false equivalence, even if it's inadvertent, because these kinds of audiences are extremely impressionable. And I think that you want to make sure that you are challenging their pre-existing biases and not affirming them. And on a different platform, I wouldn't be as nitpicky, but on a right-wing platform like this one, the one goal is to do everything you can to delegitimize the fascists in power. That doesn't mean that you have to be a Democratic Party hack. You can be honest and critique them, but it has to be more of a yes and not a yes period. And to be fair to Bernie Sanders, I think that he brought up Trump's authoritarianism all throughout the episode. So it's not like he didn't push back enough, but you do have to be quick on your toes here, because these people are very good at bringing everything back to the Democratic Party. Yep. And they're uniquely bad as opposed to Republicans, right? Even if you don't say Democrats only are bad, people are primed to think that that's the case, which is why they end up tacitly supporting Republicans. Because if they just hear Democrats bad, Democrats bad, Democrats bad, then the impression is, oh, well, I guess I'll support Republicans. And that's how I think some people from the Bernie bro community ended up down this Trump supporting path, as these guys were the case, to the extent that they're representative of average people, which is limited. But, nonetheless, you don't have to defend Democrats, but you should definitely reject the false equivalence, because as much as I loathe the Democratic Party myself, the difference between them and Republicans is very clear. But I don't want to sound overly critical of Bernie Sanders in this section, because I think that overall, when you step back and you look at the entire appearance, I think it was fine overall. I think he did really well. I don't think that viewers of podcasts like this typically go out of their way to leave their bubbles, which is why I think it's really important for people to go on these platforms and meet them where they are. But if politicians are going to continue to do things like this, which they should, they've got to be mindful of the pitfalls that could ultimately undermine the message that they're trying to get out to these communities.
The Humanist Report.
Yeah, that's actually Mike fucking killed it right there. Mike killed it right there. Absolutely killed it right there. And that's something like I try to continue to do, is say, I don't want anybody to get me wrong. I have criticisms of the way things get done on the left. I have criticisms of how sometimes people push out people that they have foundationally the same beliefs and goals as. But at the end of the day, I'm not that person, right? I'm not going to push you out if you believe that people should have health care. If you believe that people should have more time with their family members, that they should have paid time off, that no person should ever go bankrupt because their wife has cancer or lose their home because of that. If you have the same beliefs as I do, then we can have a conversation, even if we disagree on how those things should be done or when certain lines are crossed. But what Mike said is really important. I don't want anybody to misunderstand me. Donald Trump is a dictator. Donald Trump is pushing past lines that should have never, ever been tested by a president of the United States of America. Donald Trump is one of the, if not the worst president that has ever occupied the Oval Office. And I don't want people to ever get that wrong. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please like and subscribe and hit that notification bell, and check out that video on the screen now.